Number 1.
Family and friends are holding on to hope as they continue their search for 22-year-old Marquez Duncan Jr., who disappeared from his home in Tuskegee, Alabama 3 weeks ago. They say it's out of character for Kez to go this long without talking to anyone, especially his mother, who lives in Michigan. "We talk every other day, if not every day," Tatesia Stevens Duncan told us. "And we video chat, so I can see his face. He would never go this long without talking to anyone. We never go this long without talking to each other." Tatesia added that she video chatted with her son the night he disappeared, February 23, 2021. She said Marquez seemed fine, happy. He told her he was pledging to a fraternity at Tuskegee University, where he was studying chemical engineering. So when Tatesia failed to reach him by phone later that week, she assumed he was busy with pledging activities. But by Saturday, when she hadn't heard from him, she was worried. After multiple calls with Marquez's friends and roommates, they figured out he hadn't been seen since the night of February 23. Tatesia added that her son's cell phone was also missing, but his wallet was left behind at his apartment. "Why would he leave without his wallet?" Tatesia pointed out. "And he never went anywhere without his sunglasses and his jewelry. All of his stuff was left at the apartment. It just doesn't make sense." Marquez was reported missing to the Tuskegee Police Department, and Sergeant B.J. McCullough told reporters at a press conference that they are doing everything in their power to find Marquez. "Right now, we're using all technology to assist and locate him," Sergeant McCullough said. He added that they have also reached out to a Lee, Alabama law enforcement agency for assistance. Marquez, who is a native of Georgia, moved to Tuskegee to study chemical engineering at Tuskegee University. His godmother, LaTanya Davis, told us their family believed he was still attending classes, but recently learned he was no longer enrolled. The university released a statement that Marquez was missing, indicating that he was a student at one time and that he was last seen at his off-campus residence. LaTanya and other family members, who live in Georgia and Michigan, will be traveling to Tuskegee later this week to hand out flyers and talk with neighbors. "Somebody out there knows something about where Marquez could be," LaTanya told us. "We just hope they find it in their heart to come forward." Last week, Central Alabama Crime Stoppers announced that a $1,000 reward is being offered for information that leads to Marquez's whereabouts. His mother hopes it will entice someone with information to come forward. This Tuesday marks 3 weeks since Marquez was last seen or heard from. "As a mother, I'm just getting really anxious," Tatesia said. "It's been too long, he's been gone too long." Tatesia said her mother, Marquez's grandmother, wakes up every day and calls his cell phone, hoping for an answer on the other end. "Our family is very worried about our Marquez," Tatesia said. "I just want my child back." Marquez is described as being 6'0" tall and weighing 185 pounds. He was last seen wearing a t-shirt and black gym shorts. If you have information, please immediately call the Tuskegee Police Department at 334-727-0200 or Crime Stoppers at 334-215. Stopper toll-free at 1-833-AL1-STOP.
Number 2.
Lisa was reportedly last seen between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. leaving the house party with the aforementioned man, who is said to have been driving an older model red Jaguar. He'd offered her a ride to a nearby sandwich shop as she was hungry and was looking for a vegetarian option that wasn't available at the party. Her last known contact with anyone was at 4:30 a.m. when she contacted Dallas and told her that the man hadn't taken her to the sandwich shop and that the pair were sitting in his car in the driveway at another house party on Bowen Road. She reportedly was either waiting in the car or was locked in and unable to get out. She didn't feel comfortable and asked Dallas, "Come get me, they won't let me leave." It's unknown if he saw these messages at the time. According to reports, she also made a phone call to another female friend around the same time and shared the same concerns. None of this information has been officially corroborated by police. The final signals from Lisa's cell phone came from the Departure Bay area of Nanaimo. Initially, her parents weren't too concerned when they hadn't heard from her, assuming she was simply too busy to answer the phone But their concern soon grew when her former roommate came by to ask of her whereabouts. By that time, many of her friends were already out in their cars, looking for her. By July 1, her parents' worry was insurmountable. After calling every number in Lisa's phone book, her parents contacted the Nanaimo detachment of the RCMP. Initially, they were told they had to wait until she'd been missing 48 hours before filing a missing persons report, but an officer ended up coming over to the house later that evening to ask questions and obtain a photo of her. However, he told Marilyn and Dawn that he would be off the next 4 days and would therefore call them the following Friday. Eventually, they were told the case would be investigated by the detachment's Serious Crime Unit. While the family waited for the official police search to begin, they contacted local media. They also assembled men with the Tlaoquiot First Nation to arrange volunteer searches based on tips from the public. Very little information is publicly available regarding the RCMP's investigation into Lisa's disappearance. The Fist land search occurred in September 2002, a few months after she was last seen. The family has never heard what happened regarding attempts to trace the whereabouts of Lisa's cell phone, and it's currently unknown what happened to it. 1 to 2 months into the investigation, investigators with the RCMP identified the red Jaguar Lisa was last seen in and the man she'd been with. While his name has been released by some news outlets, Stories of the Unsolved will not be naming him in this article, as his family has threatened to sue those who publicly name him. While he has not been arrested or charged with any crimes related to the case, he remains a strong person of interest. According to reports, he'd previously been convicted of numerous charges, including theft, assault, and fraud in Kamloops, British Columbia, and for unauthorized credit card use in Edmonton, Alberta. After Lisa's disappearance, he would be charged with breach of conditional sentence and assaulting a peace officer. The car the man had been driving that night was owned by his grandmother, who was a prominent member of a business community in Qualicum Beach, British Columbia until her death in 2011. By the time it was seized for forensic testing, it had already been steam cleaned. It was sold shortly after Lisa's disappearance. The results of the tests were never made public, and it was returned shortly after. In a video released by Nanaimo Crime Stoppers, the public was urged to contact the RCMP if they happened to see the red Jaguar in a suspicious area between 3:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. on the day Lisa went missing. According to reports that have not been confirmed by investigators, Lisa's mother spoke with the man in a police interrogation room. She asked where her daughter was, to which he responded, "I can't. I'm sorry, I don't mean to disrespect your family." Prior to the meeting, she'd been asked to bring pictures of Lisa from when she was a child, in the hopes of guilting him into a confession, but the tactic did not work. Lisa's family does not know where the man claims to have dropped her off, and investigators say they are unable to release this information, as it might prejudice the investigation. According to Marilyn's sister, Carol Frank, he claims to have dropped her off after she said she wanted to take a taxi home, but there are no records of her having called one. Marilyn was the one to ask Crime Stoppers to create a reenactment of the night Lisa went missing, as she was desperate to generate new leads. The video was released in May 2009. According to Carol, she initially tried to hide the fact that Marilyn and Lisa were of First Nations ancestry, as she feared the public would assume her to be a sex worker, living on the street, or an alcohol or drug addict. The RCMP made an appeal for information as to Lisa's whereabouts on February 25, 2011. In December 2019, a billboard featuring information about Lisa's case and that of another missing Indigenous woman, Angeline Pete, was put up along the Island Highway, which passed through Nanis Bay. Money for the billboard was raised by the Lil Red Dress Project, which sells red dress earrings and pins to help fund signage for missing and murdered Indigenous women on Vancouver Island. Investigators conducted 2 searches in relation to the case in December 2020. One was at a Nanaimo Lakes Road property, which her family had heard mentioned a few times through word of mouth. It backed onto Morel Sanctuary, a nearly 280-acre park that was also partially searched. According to a neighbor, they'd seen what looked like a body in a hammock in the house's backyard around the time Lisa went missing. Soon after, He saw equipment moving soil, which piqued his interest and pushed him to contact the police. The current owners of the house had purchased it in 2003 and only learned a month prior that police were interested in searching it. In the years since Lisa went missing, her family has covered Vancouver Island with missing persons posters, followed leads, consulted with psychics and spoken to countless members of the media across British Columbia. Investigators suspect foul play in the case and have stated it's currently being looked into as a homicide, as Lisa did not have a reason to disappear. They have interviewed numerous people in relation to the case and have followed up on every tip. Despite their efforts, no charges have been laid, and her body has never been found. Lisa's family has been critical of the investigation. They have publicly complained about the attitudes of the officers who have been in contact with them and feel they only hear from investigators when they themselves call to ask for updates. They say the support they've been given has been neither helpful nor practical, and that the information they hear from police often contradicts that learned from Lisa's friends and those in the community. In November 2003, Lisa's friend, Alison Crow, produced and released a song in her memory, titled Lisa's Song, which was featured on her debut EP, Lisa's Song Plus 6 Songs. All of the tracks had been recorded beforehand, but she chose to do one more recording session after her friend's disappearance. Lisa's case has received increased attention as part of Canada's national inquiry into the country's missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Her aunt and her grandmother, Cecilia Arnott, gave statements, and Carol was the only new CHantelle representative to attend the ceremony in Gatineau, Quebec, where the report was handed over to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa's friends and family hold an annual march in her honor and have held numerous candlelight vigils over the years. Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog declared June 28 Justice for Lisa Marie Young Day, while June 30 has been dubbed Lights On for Lisa Day, where residents are encouraged to leave their porch lights on in her memory. Carol has looked into Lisa and the memories of other missing Indigenous women having a lasting legacy in the village of Tofino by making red dresses and shawls. This is done with the help of a small neighborhood grant from the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust and is done to remind those living in the community about the area's missing and murdered Indigenous women. Marilyn passed away on June 21, 2017 from liver failure. The 54-year-old had been on dialysis, suffering from hypertension, and had been on the waiting list for a kidney transplant. Her family believes her health issues were caused by the stress brought about by Lisa's disappearance. On March 25, 2018, Dallas died after being struck by a vehicle along Highway 19A. He'd been walking with a female friend around 1 a.m. and had stepped into the northbound lane to retrieve something he'd dropped when a female driver struck him. He was pronounced dead at 6:15 a.m. that morning. The driver was not speeding at the time and had been unable to avoid him due to his lack of reflective clothing. Currently, her case is classified as endangered missing and is being investigated as a homicide. If alive, she would be 39 years old. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the Nanaimo detachment of the RCMP at 250-754-2345. Those wishing to remain anonymous can call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477.
Number 3.
Before leaving home, Evelyn was instructed by her father to call her parents at around 8:30 p.m. to check in. When she didn't call, Richard tried phoning the Rasmussens' home a few times and received no answer. Worried, he ended up driving over to the family's house to check that everything was okay. When he arrived at the home on Hochler Drive, he found the lights and radio were on and that the doors leading into the house were locked. He knocked on both and rang the front doorbell, but Evelyn never answered. As his concern grew, he looked through one of the windows to find his daughter's glasses and one of her shoes lying on the living room floor. After a walk around of the home's exterior, he found the only open window entered into the basement, toward the back of the house. The screen had been removed and placed against the outside wall, and a small stepladder had been positioned directly below it inside. It would later be learned that the family had been using it while painting the basement. It was through this window that Richard would enter the home. Upon entering the home, Richard found Evelyn's other shoe in the basement. As he inspected each room, He found no sign of his daughter, but did notice that Janice was sound asleep in her crib, unharmed. A closer examination of the living room found the furniture was in disarray, Evelyn's schoolbooks were scattered, and her glasses had been broken. Richard also noticed blood in the home, which only worked to heighten his concern. A neighbor of the Rasmussens saw Richard walking around the home and came over to see what was going on. Upon the worried father explaining the situation, the neighbor offered to help look for Evelyn before returning home to call the police. Richard explained the situation to the dispatcher and officers were sent to the location to look into the matter. When the Rasmussens returned home, they found their residence surrounded by police cars. Investigators found numerous clues when looking in and around the Rasmussen home. There were pry marks on 3 windows, showing someone had attempted numerous times to break into the home before finally settling on entering through the basement. There were also numerous areas where blood was present, which matched Evelyn's blood type. There were 2 pools in the yard, with one 183 in diameter and more located inside the house, near the basement window. A bloody handprint was also located approximately 42 from the ground on the wall of the garage, which was 1,002 from the main house, and additional stains were found on the outer wall of a neighbor's residence. Given the amount of blood at the scene, it was theorized that Evelyn's abductors had been carrying her through the yard, but had to stop and rest her on the ground, which resulted in the pooling. Footprints were also located in the basement window box and in the living room, which appeared to have come from a pair of sneakers with a distinct pattern on the sole. According to a book on the case, detectives also found clues to suggest Evelyn had been removed from the house via the basement window. A button with red threads had been found attached to the window well, and her father recalled that she'd been wearing red denim pants when she left the house. Unfortunately, the evidence was not collected and eventually blew away in the wind. Despite the front door being locked upon Richard arriving at the home, there was evidence to suggest that the suspect or suspects had left through it, as it had a self-locking mechanism. Tracking dogs were brought to the scene to help investigators get a feel of where Evelyn's abductors went after leaving the house. They were able to follow the missing girl's scent 2 blocks, but unfortunately lost the trail at Cowley Drive, just northwest of the Rasmussen home. This led to the theory that she had been placed in a vehicle parked nearby. This was corroborated by numerous neighbors who came forward to say they'd seen a suspicious car in the neighborhood that night. One reported seeing a light-colored vehicle circling around the neighborhood at around 8 p.m., while another claimed to have heard screams around 7 p.m., but had assumed they were from children playing outside. This helped investigators to develop a timeline, which suggested Evelyn had been abducted sometimes within that hour. 2 days later, a local man by the name of Ed Hofer came forward to share with investigators the encounter he'd had with a 2-toned green 1941 or 1942 Buick on the night of Evelyn's disappearance. He said he'd been out driving when, at around 7:15 p.m., he was almost hit by the vehicle. Inside were 2 men and a woman. One of the men was driving the car, while the second was in the backseat with the woman, who was slumped forward with her head leaning against the front seat. He believed he'd seen the occupants staggering down the street a few minutes earlier, close to where the pools of blood were later located. At the time, he hadn't thought anything of the encounter, as he'd assumed they were heading to the homecoming game and Evelyn hadn't yet been reported missing. Several days after Evelyn disappeared, a pair of underpants and a brassiere were located near the underpass on Highway 14, 2 miles south of La Crosse. Both were blood-stained, and the blood in the underpants was later determined to be menstrual blood of Evelyn's blood type. A pair of blood-stained men's pants were found 4 miles down the same road, but it's unknown if they were connected to the case. More blood-stained items were later located, a pair of size 11 Goodrich brand sneakers and a size 36 denim jacket. They were found 8,002 from each other in the Coon Valley area, located southeast of La Crosse, and had apparently been dumped only a short time before being found. As with the brassiere and underpants, the blood on both matched Evelyn's blood type, and the shoes, in particular, had a suction cup pattern that was similar to the footprints found at the Rasmussens' home. Investigators contacted Goodrich and learned the particular model, called Hood Mogul, had been sold in Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, and Minnesota. Based on the tread pattern, it's believed whoever owned them worked with machinery, and the wear pattern was distinctive of someone who frequently operated a whizzer motorbike. Inside of one was a single human hair, possibly belonging to an African American individual, and it was determined that two different people had worn the shoes, with the second wearer's feet having been too big. Investigators had heard a rumor a few days prior, saying the jacket was been seen lying along the highway. They followed up and found it in the possession of a local farmer who'd picked it up and thrown it into his truck, where it remained until taken into police possession. On it were base metal paint flecks, and it had been cut off at the bottom and crudely re-hemmed with white thread. One of the 4 buttons were also missing. There were blast fibers, similar to the kind used in scrubbing brushes, in the left-hand pocket, and there was a worn mark under the armpits, running the entire width of the jacket, which was similar to the wear of someone who worked as a steeplejack. This led them to look into locals working in the trade, but the lead led nowhere. Investigators connected the jacket to the crime scene via spectrographic analysis, but noted that it appeared too small to have been worn by someone large enough to wear size 11 shoes. In the hopes of garnering new leads, they brought the shoes and jacket to 31 different communities, where 10,000 people viewed them, but nothing of value came from the showings. Evelyn's disappearance resulted in one of the largest missing person searches in Wisconsin's history, with 2,000 people volunteering. Searching on foot, with the aid of watercraft, airplane and helicopter, were members of the local community, law enforcement officials, La Crosse State College faculty and students, the National Guard and members of the Boy Scouts who combed the area in and around La Crosse. Squirrel and deer hunters were told to stay on alert for anything suspicious, while local farmers were urged to check their properties. Investigators conducted a mass search of local vehicles, suspecting the one belonging to the suspects would contain traces of Evelyn's blood. The rear seats and the trunk of each vehicle were the primary focus, and local law enforcement enlisted the help of gas station attendants, who were also tasked with checking. They were told to report the license plate numbers of anyone who refused a search, and the cars deemed clean were marked with a sticker, which read "My car is okay." Recent graves were reopened during the early days of the investigation, in case Evelyn's abductors had placed her body in a burial plot. Clam Lake, located near Fairmont, Minnesota, was dragged after a fisherman said he'd caught a number of hair strands and a bobby pin in a hook after freeing his tackle from an underwater snag, all of which he threw back in the water. Neither they, nor anything else of value, were recovered and the search was eventually called off. In May 1954, investigators began to conduct mass lie detector tests on all male students and teachers at Central High School. In total, they'd planned to administer them to over 1,750 individuals, but decided to halt the tests after just 300, as the practice was controversial. Evelyn's father and Viggo Rasmussen were also given polygraphs and passed. Throughout the beginning of the investigation, the Hartleys repeatedly appealed for information regarding Evelyn's case. They also used the media to speak directly to those involved, asking them to somehow let them know what happened to her. As a result, they were the subjects of an attempted extortion after a 20-year-old man offered to exchange information for a $500 fee. The family contacted the police and managed to ensnare the man in a trap. He, along with a 13-year-old boy he'd convinced to participate, were arrested, and he was subsequently convicted of and imprisoned for the crime. Many suspects were questioned over the years, but investigators were never able to connect the evidence to any of them. Dozens of people falsely confessed, and during the first year over 3,500 individuals were interviewed. Evelyn's case has always been considered a homicide, despite her body not being located. Police say every lead has been followed, and they currently have her dentals available for comparison, should her remains be located. It has been revealed that the shoes and jacket were misplaced, but that other evidence has been maintained and stored. Theories. 1. A popular theory that has since been discredited by investigators is that serial killer Edward Ed Theodore Gine was involved in Evelyn's disappearance. Many believe him to have been involved, as he was in La Crosse visiting relatives on the night she went missing, just a few blocks from the Rasmussen home. He was known to kill women and dig up their remains in a cemetery, after which he would mutilate them. In 1957, He was questioned in the disappearance of a local barmaid, and a search of his property uncovered human remains. No trace of Evelyn was found on the property and he denied any involvement in the crime, passing 2 lie detector tests. He was officially cleared of any involvement in November of that year. He was eventually placed in a mental institution, where he was declared clinically insane, and he passed away in 1984. 2. There are some who believe Evelyn was not the intended target of the abduction, as she was filling in for the Rasmussens' regular babysitter. If the abduction had been planned, the suspects would have assumed that the original babysitter would be at the residence that night, meaning Evelyn was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. 3. Since the majority of residents were at the homecoming game on the night Evelyn went missing, it's theorized that the initial motive for the crime was robbery. As most people would not be home, it would have been a prime opportunity for any would-be thieves to stake out houses and steal valuables. However, while the living room was in disarray, nothing of value was said to be missing from the Rasmussens' house. It's believed by some investigators that her abductors had staked out the home, but that the robbery was botched when the suspects came upon Evelyn inside the residence. This is further corroborated by signs that an attempted forced entry was found on a neighbor's house. 4. Locals believed that the crime may have been a random attack by a transient who was passing through town. Those who supported this theory thought it likely the drifter was high on drugs when he entered the house and attacked Evelyn. 5. A final theory is the result of an audio recording that was submitted to police in 2004. That year, a man named Mel Williams came forward with a recording of someone who claimed responsibility for the crime. On the recording, which was initially intended to be of a band performing at a local bar, Clyde Twee Peterson claimed he, Jack Gulpare and an unnamed third party had murdered Evelyn and buried her in Lafarge, Wisconsin. The tape ended after Peterson told Williams to stop recording, and Williams does not recall what happened after it was turned off. Police promised to investigate the lead, but no further developments were ever publicized. Gulpare and the unnamed third party are now deceased. Evelyn's parents eventually came to terms with the fact they'd likely never find out what happened to their daughter. In the 1970s, they relocated to Portland, Oregon. They have both since passed away. One of her siblings still lives in Oregon, while the other moved to Australia, where they died in 2016. Currently, her case is classified as a non-family abduction and is being investigated as a homicide. If alive, she would be 83 years old. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the La Crosse Police Department at 608-785-5962.
Number 4.
On September 7, 2008, Lori tried to get in contact with her daughter, but was unable to do so. While she was a little worried, she was sure Maisy would call soon, as she'd been instructed to do so before heading to Shannon's a few days prior. Brian returned home to find the girls were not there, which confused him, given they'd left behind their backpacks, wallets, purses and identification. Shannon had also left behind her medication. The next day, Lori went over to the apartment, where she and Brian exchanged information. The pair began to worry about their daughter's locations, and Lori started calling their friends, learning small tidbits of information regarding the last people to see the two. It was on this day that the police were alerted to the disappearances. Initially, the police listed the two girls as runaways, a decision the families believe stalled the investigation. According to detectives, there was no indication the pair had gotten into trouble, which struck a wrong chord with Brian and Lori, given Maisy and Shannon had left behind their personal belongings. Concerned, both families continued to insist the girls would never have run away. While they had in the past left unannounced, they would always call to keep their loved ones informed of their whereabouts. Unfortunately, the runaway classification resulted in numerous hindrances to the case. Not only was Brian's apartment not searched, the media were not immediately alerted, and the families did not receive official case numbers. Another hindrance was that the girls technically lived in different jurisdictions. As Maisy lived on the reserve, her case was being handled by the Kitigan-Zibi-Anishinabeg Police Department, while Shannon's was handled by the Sûreté du Québec, the province's police force. As of 2009, Maisy's case was officially transferred to the provincial organization. On September 12, 2008, the Kitigan-Zibi Anishinabeg First Nation set up a press conference where Lori and Brian urged their daughters to return home. Unfortunately, only the local paper showed up. On September 23, 2008, volunteers came together to hang up missing persons flyers and combed riverbanks on the reserve using boats that had been volunteered to the cause. Canvas searches also occurred in Ottawa, Ontario and Gatineau, Quebec at this time. To help get word out about the girls' disappearances, Maisy's aunt, Maria Jacko, set up a website dedicated to the case, and a few weeks later, during the 2008 Thanksgiving long weekend, a search was organized within Ottawa after several reported sightings in the city's Vanier area. Search and Rescue Global One was invited to help participate in the search in December 2008. They conducted 2 searches, with the first involving the Ottawa Valley Search and Rescue Dog Association and around 100 community members combing a 5 kilometers area around Brian's apartment. The second occurred in May 2009, but both failed to uncover any evidence. That same month, bones were found near the reserve. While they were at first believed to be related to the cases, tests revealed they belonged to an animal. Investigators say they've received tips that the girls may have been seen in Montreal, Quebec and Ottawa. As a result, they held a news conference in the Ontario city, where they further revealed more sightings. According to tips, it's possible Shannon and Maisy had been seen in numerous areas around the eastern and southern areas of the province. At this time, the Ontario Provincial Police added profiles of both girls to their missing persons webpage. In August 2011, investigators revealed the pair may have come into contact with a local sex offender. The unnamed man died by suicide in July 2011, whilst being held in the Hull jail, leaving behind a suicide note. Not much else has been shared regarding this aspect of the investigation. October 2013 saw 2 awareness campaigns held. The first was the Sisters in Spirit March at Parliament Hill, which aimed to highlight Canada's numerous cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women. The second was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police social media campaign, which highlighted 10 cases of missing Indigenous women, including Maisy and Shannon. In December 2015, age progression sketches were released to show what the girls might have looked like at 24 years old. New information about the disappearances was received in July 2017, which led to a search of Pitabig Creek on the Kitigan-Zibi Reserve. The area was near Paganakaman Road and the Maniwaki Speedway. Investigators had been led to believe that Shannon and Maisy's bodies could be found there, so they used a small excavator, the forensics team, an emergency unit and dive teams to search the waters and surrounding area. Unfortunately, nothing was found, and police learned that the speedway had been expanded over the years, meaning that the shoreline had been disturbed by moved dirt. At this time, 20 individuals were interviewed in relation to the case. A billboard has been set up at the entrance of the reserve, which features the pair's names, images and numbers drivers can call if they have any information. On the 10th anniversary of Maisy and Shannon's disappearances, investigators set up a command post in the community's cultural center and urged people to send in new leads. A second billboard, which is digital, was installed along Highway 105, the main road that runs through the reserve, in February 2020. It features information about the case, as well as that of Cindy Ruperthouse, who went missing from Val d'Or, Quebec on April 23, 2014. The project is one of more than 100 being funded by Canada's National Inquiry into the country's missing and murdered Indigenous women. The billboard itself will be used to display unsolved missing person and homicide cases and will serve as an alert system for the surrounding region. Detectives have shared that the majority of tips came in during the first 3 months of the investigation. They have officially ruled out that the girls left voluntarily and are working on the assumption that their disappearances are suspicious and possibly resulted in homicide. Over the course of the investigation, the Sûreté du Québec has collaborated with a host of other police agencies, including the OP, the RCMP and the Kitigan-Zibi Anishinabeg Police Department. Shannon and Maisy's families hold a march and vigil in Kitigan-Zibi each year in order to maintain awareness about their disappearances. Maisy's extended family also holds an annual walk-run to help raise money for a reward fund. In 2009, Laurie published a poem dedicated to her daughter. Laurie has been asked to speak at various events related to missing and murdered Indigenous women and publicly supports groups that bring awareness to such cases, such as the Redress Project and Walking with Our Sisters. She was one of many who traveled to Ottawa to speak with federal ministers during Canada's national inquiry. While she hoped the inquiry would look into the relationship between families and law enforcement, she has since questioned the federal government's actions and findings. Maisy's cousin, Jennifer Tanasco, is a runner who is looking to make a name for herself in order to raise awareness about the case and those of other Indigenous women. She has competed in the Ontario Aboriginal Summer Games. Shannon Mary Dale Alexander was last seen on September 6, 2008 in Maniwaki, Quebec. She was 17 years old, and while what she was last seen wearing is unknown, it's believed she might have a silver necklace with a feather around her neck. At the time of her disappearance, she stood at 5'93" and weighed approximately 141 to 145 pounds. She has short brown to black hair and brown eyes. She has a scar on her left knee and a pockmarked complexion, with acne scars on her face. Her ears are pierced, and she is known to sometimes use the surname Maithawise. Maisy Marie Odjick was last seen on September 6, 2008 in Maniwaki, Quebec. She was 16 years old, and what she was last seen wearing is unknown. At the time of her disappearance, she stood between 5'10" and 63 tall and weighed approximately 120 to 126 pounds. She has short brown to black hair and brown eyes. She has numerous piercings, one on her left eyebrow, two on her lower lip and two on her nipples. She has a scar above her right eyebrow. Those with information regarding the cases are asked to contact the Sûreté du Québec Central Info Crime line at 1-800-659-4264. Tips can also be called into the Missing Children Society of Canada at 1-800-661-6160 and the Missing Children's Network at 1-888-692-4673.
Number 5.
At 3 a.m. on February 27, 2015, Brooklyn called her mother to say she was leaving a gathering in East Regina. The party had gotten too out of hand, with the majority of the attendees drinking. According to Brooklyn, she'd not had any alcohol. This would be the last time anyone heard from the young woman. In July 2015, the Regina Police Service issued a press release asking for the public's help in finding Brooklyn. It was then they revealed she'd had warrants out for her arrest at the time of her disappearance, but that they were for relatively minor offenses. Brooklyn's body was eventually found in September 2015 in the attic of the house she was renting. Firefighters had to be called in to help in the retrieval, given the cramped location, and they used power tools to create a passage into the attic from the outside of the home. After this was completed, the Major Crimes Unit, the coroner and the forensics teams could begin their investigation. Records show that Brooklyn had requested to have her locks changed twice before her death, this according to the home's former manager. The first instance had been when she'd evicted her former roommate, and the second had been shortly before she went missing. In November 2015, just over a month or so after Brooklyn's remains were found, the Regina Police Service received a call in the early hours to say that the home was ablaze. According to the former manager, at least one person had broken in, poured gas in the attic, and lit the fire. While no one has been apprehended for the arson, the fire marshal has confirmed the blaze was deliberately set. The Regina Police Service says it conducted a thorough investigation into Brooklyn's death, but failed to find any evidence pointing to foul play or criminal involvement. The former manager believes Brooklyn died by suicide. He'd evicted her shortly before her disappearance, and upon inspecting the home shortly after, he'd found a television stand placed directly below the attic hatch, with a small amount of insulation on the floor around it. When he'd heard about Brooklyn's disappearance, he'd told the authorities to check the attic, and when they'd opened the hatch, insulation rained down on them, indicating it had been placed on the inside of the door. Given it wouldn't have been possible for someone to have covered the door with insulation from below the hatch, it's believed by many that Brooklyn took her own life. Margaret disagrees with both theories, believing her daughter was murdered while traveling back to her place in the early hours of February 27. Initially, she'd been too heartbroken to fight the determination that foul play hadn't been involved, but she has since decided to fight the ruling after attending a shaking tent. This is where Indigenous peoples attend ceremonies led by elders who call upon spirits. While in attendance, Margaret learned that her daughter was in the spirit world and later felt Brooklyn had been with her the summer following the ceremonies. Brooklyn's community is also of the belief she wouldn't have taken her own life. The In Loving Memory of Brooklyn Moose Sabbath Facebook page was created to help raise awareness about the case. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the Regina Detachment of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police at either 306-781-5050 or 306-777-6500. Tips can also be submitted anonymously via Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477.
Number 6.
Charlene was last seen in July 22, 1990 while looking to hitchhike a ride back to Yellowknife. According to an acquaintance, they had last saw her at the intersection of Highway 3 and Ray Access Road, now known as Bachakia Access Road, approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Yellowknife. They had told Charlene to stay put while they briefly left, but upon their return they found she had disappeared. According to an article published in the Edmonton Journal in December 1990, Charlene had met up with some fellow teenagers from Fort Ray. However, the validity of these claims is unknown. Wanting to find his daughter, Joe used his own funds to progress the search. He traveled to the United States, visiting 5 states, where he created and put up missing persons posters featuring Charlene's image and description. It's said that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police initially had a suspect in the case, but nothing ever came of this development. On June 9, 2017, the Northwest Territories Supreme Court issued an order stating it had reasonable grounds to presume Charlene was deceased. As a result, she is no longer considered a missing person, and her case is being investigated as a possible homicide. In May 2019, Charlene was featured in a week-long campaign the RCMP used to highlight missing children on its missing persons website. The public was reminded of the case in July 2020 when the RCMP's Historical Case Unit, which has since taken over the investigation, sent out a public notice saying the file was still open and active. The unit looks to investigate cases of historical homicide and suspicious death, as well as long-term missing persons cases within the Northwest Territories. This resulted in a few tips being called in. In September 2020, the Historical Case Unit, with the help of the Forensic Identification Section and the Major Crimes Unit, searched an area of interest near Bachakia. Charlene's family and those within the community leadership of the hamlet were notified of the operation. According to investigators, foul play is suspected in the case, given the amount of time that has passed. While the RCMP has reiterated the investigation is active and ongoing, the Catholique family has been critical, saying they haven't been contacted about the case since 2008. Joe eventually gave up trying to get investigators to take the case seriously before eventually giving up on the endeavor. His grievances were shared by Anne and 2 more of Charlene's aunts, Doris and Lorraine Catholique, who have publicly stated they feel the organization isn't doing its job. Despite the frustration, Lorraine has diligently kept on top of the file and has spoken numerous times with investigators. The RCMP states that its mandate is to keep a missing persons file active until the individual reaches the age of 110, unless their date of birth is unknown. If that's the case, the file is kept open until the presumed age of 92. Joe has since passed away. According to Anne, he was in constant pain over not knowing what happened to his daughter. The Catholique family participated in Canada's national inquiry into the county's missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They attended the hearings held in Yellowknife in January 2018. In October 2018, Charlene was one of the Indigenous women honored at the Sisters in Spirit vigil held in Grande Prairie, Alberta, Canada. Charlene Catholique went missing from the intersection of Highway 3 and Ray Access Road, now Bachakia Access Road, in the Northwest Territories on July 22, 1990. She was 15 years old and she was last seen wearing a neon pink cotton sweatshirt, a pair of acid-washed blue jeans, a nylon blue jacket with white sleeves, and a pair of white running shoes. At the time of her disappearance, she had a slender build, standing between 5'53" and 5'63" and weighing approximately 125 to 126 pounds. She had short black hair and brown eyes. Her ears are pierced, and she had facial acne at the time. Currently, the case is classified as endangered missing, with foul play suspected. If alive, she would be 45 years old. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the Pachacchia detachment of the RCMP at either 867-669-5235, 867-669-5236, 867-669-5237, or 867-669-1111. Those wishing to remain anonymous can submit tips via Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477.
Number 7.
CHantelle Bushie was born on April 2, 1991 in Grande Prairie, Alberta, Canada. The daughter of a single mother, she and her family had a difficult time during her upbringing, with CHantelle in particular experiencing numerous traumatic events. When she was 11 years old, she and her brother witnessed the death of their younger sister, Summer, after she fell under a wagon wheel during a community event, and it's reported that CHantelle was sexually abused during her teenage years. The Bushie family are of Alberta's Deenthau First Nation and spent some of CHantelle's childhood living in one of its 3 communities, Meander River. When she was 12 years old, her mother, Vivian, moved the family back to Grande Prairie, where she enrolled in the Teacher Education North program at a local college in the hopes of one day working with Indigenous students in rural northern schools. However, due to the stress of raising her children and having to work on top of her educational funding being cut off during the summer months, she was forced to drop out after only a year. Unfortunately, CHantelle and Vivian's relationship began to deteriorate upon returning to Grande Prairie. As she entered her teenage years, she began to cut class and run away, often disappearing for days at a time. According to Vivian, her daughter felt as though she didn't belong anywhere and thus had a difficult time making friends. She eventually ended up spending time with a bad crowd, and they began to influence her behavior. According to authorities, CHantelle led what's been deemed a high-risk lifestyle. She was known to police as someone who would hang around sex workers and drug dealers, although she participated in neither activity, and her running away meant she was known to local law enforcement. This prompted her mother to contact child welfare in order to see if there was anything she could do to help steer her in the right direction. However, their response was that they could only get involved if CHantelle ended up becoming a risk to herself. Despite her hardships, CHantelle was an overall kind girl who was known for her sass. Whilst in school, she found herself skilled in both math and art, which her mother remembers her enjoying. When she was 15 years old, she became pregnant and gave birth to a baby girl named Fatima. In April 2007, Vivian filed for custody of the child, a request that was granted. CHantelle was last heard from in December 2007. At the time, her disappearance didn't seem unusual, given her history of running away from home. Vivian simply assumed her daughter was on the streets somewhere, and the police would not get involved unless she got in trouble with the law. It wasn't until September 14, 2009, that the teenager was officially reported missing, nearly 2 years since she'd last contacted her family. This came after Vivian was unable to verify that she was in Vancouver, British Columbia, where it was believed she had traveled. CHantelle's case is currently being handled by the Grande Prairie Detachment of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It had been temporarily transferred to the organization's Care Unit, which investigates files of murdered and vulnerable individuals throughout Alberta, but the case was deemed to not fit its mandate. There have been no updates since this occurred, and the Bushie family claims to have not heard from investigators since 2012. The authorities have said they are unable to share details about the case, given its ongoing nature. However, they have said that the investigator in charge regularly meets with a representative from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection to discuss CHantelle and other files. Vivian is continuing to take care of CHantelle's daughter. It's become a priority of hers to teach Fatima about the dangers she may encounter as an Indigenous woman in Canada. CHantelle's brother has struggled with alcoholism and drug use as a method of coping with her disappearance and Summer's death. He has been in and out of jail. CHantelle Alice Rose Bushie went missing from Grande Prairie, Alberta, Canada in December 2007. She was 16 years old. At the time of her disappearance, she was of a medium build, standing at 5'53" and weighing approximately 119 pounds. She has short black hair and brown eyes and has a tattoo of the letters VT on her left hand, which represent her parents' initials. Currently, the case is classified as endangered missing. If alive, she would be 30 years old. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the Grande Prairie Detachment of the RCMP at either 780-830-5700 or 780-830-5701. Those wishing to remain anonymous can submit tips via Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477.
Number 8.
At the time of her disappearance, Annie had returned home from Dauphin and was staying with her brother, Fred Yassie. On June 22, 1974, she was out with a man, described as being at least 10 years her senior. The pair were drunk and had been out celebrating Treaty Day. They got into a taxi and headed to the nearby gravel pits, approximately 3 kilometers outside of Churchill, which were known to be common spots for camping, parties and bonfires. According to the taxi driver, the unnamed man had to drag Annie out of the vehicle as she appeared to be passing out, and he requested that he pick them up later in the evening. According to reports, the taxi driver was the last person to officially see Annie Yassie that night. When he returned to the gravel pits hours later, he found the man alone. He was more drunk than he had been earlier in the night. When Annie didn't arrive home that night, Fred didn't worry. He'd heard his sister mention wanting to visit Eva at some point during her visit, so he simply thought she'd decided to do so after her celebrations. His assumption was that Annie was babysitting Eva's children while she worked at the clinic in the compound. Eva visited Dean Village on June 26, 1974. It was then that everyone realized that Annie had not been staying with her sister and had, in fact, been missing for 4 days. This was when she was officially reported missing to the Churchill Detachment of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. An extensive search for Annie was conducted, with investigators and volunteers scouring the area and outskirts by foot and by air. A search dog was even brought in to help. Despite the search occurring not long after Annie was reported missing, and with those involved searching every house in Dean Village, nothing related to the case was uncovered. Both investigators and Eva confronted the man Annie was last seen with. Despite being pressured by both parties to reveal what happened the night of June 22, he claimed ignorance, saying he'd had a memory lapse due to the amount of alcohol he'd ingested. The case would go cold not long after. During the fall of 2014, officers with the Winnipeg detachment of the RCMP contacted Annie's family to inform them they were reopening the file. According to Eva, this was the first time anyone with the organization had contacted her since the initial investigation back in 1974. In June 2016, the RCMP once again contacted Eva to request a DNA sample from her. Given the amount of time that had passed since Annie was last seen alive, they were currently working on the theory that she met with some form of foul play and wished to have familial DNA on file in case they located her body. Eva has since claimed there was a delay in investigators coming to collect the DNA from her, with a RCMP spokesperson countering, saying they were waiting for her to provide them with a list of names of siblings to take samples from. It's currently unknown if the DNA was eventually collected. The man Annie was last seen with has since passed away, meaning her family will never know if there were other people involved in her disappearance. While they believe the case will never be solved, they would like to at least locate her body so they can give her a traditional Dean funeral. Theories. 1. The primary theory in the case is that Annie met with some form of foul play on the night she disappeared. Given the amount of time that has passed and the lack of evidence uncovered over the course of the investigation, foul play is highly suspected by investigators. Eva believes her sister was murdered by the unnamed man she had been drinking with on June 22, 1974. 2. Initially, investigators theorized that Annie may have been sleepwalking on the night of her disappearance. Her family criticized this line of thinking, and the RCMP has since abandoned this theory. Annie Yassie went missing from just outside Churchill, Manitoba, Canada on June 22, 1974. She was 13 years old and was last seen wearing a blue denim jacket, a pair of blue denim jeans, and brown shoes with a 33 heel. At the time of her disappearance, she is said to have had a thin build, standing at 5'43" and weighing approximately 104 pounds. She has black hair and brown eyes. Currently, the case is classified as endangered missing. If alive, she would be 60 years old. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the Cold Case Unit of the Winnipeg RCMP at 204-983-5461. Those wishing to remain anonymous can do so by calling Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477.